Hi, I'm Sherry St. Marie, and I was just going to do a little video post about this, but one of my LinkedIn buddies asked me to go live so that I could talk a little bit more about what was this whole thing I posted this morning. So I was sitting on LinkedIn and I'm thinking about, what are the critical business communication skills? It is learning to communicate, right? It is also conflict management. And then I'm starting to think about what are the places we're at in this world, where a lot of bigger things have been happening. People are feeling like, gosh, how do I operate in this world? And I just put my head down for a second. And I honestly thought the very first time I really learned how to communicate, and I had no clue what I was doing, was when I was in middle school. So for me, that was actually 14 years old. We called it middle school back in those days when it was it was 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. So I was in 9th grade. And I was in a speech class. And this girl was in my class, and I got along with everybody. So I was one of those people that please don't be offended by these labels, because this was the 80s, okay? We had the jocks, and we had the dirt balls, and we had the athletes, and we had the brainiacs, and we had the nerds, and all that stuff, right? And so she and I didn't run in the same crowds, but of course I recognized her right away when I sat down in speech class, because back then she had a punk haircut, right? And punk, especially for girls, was not something very many people do. And honestly, a lot of people in our class were afraid of her because she was different. So we started the semester in speech. I took my turn a couple different times, whether it was debate or, whatever the speech topic we were supposed to do, and just was doing that. And then the last couple weeks of the semester, the teacher would switch the seating arrangement. And she, I won't say her name for respect, was sitting next to me. And I'd come into the class, and I always was nice to everybody, people with special needs, everyone. And so she was sitting next to me, and I would walk in each day and say, how you doing? I was one of those people that probably annoyed people because I'm happy in the morning and I want to say hi and are you okay and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I did that a couple days, and she was a little grunty at me, right? And then all of a sudden, one of her answers was, I don't feel like going home this weekend. I'd rather not be alive. And not everybody sitting in a class says stuff like that. So I looked at her and I just said, I hope your weekend's going to be okay. I want to see you on Monday. Okay? And I just put my head down, so she could see my eyes. I want to see you Monday. Okay? And she just grunted about something else and left. Well, a couple different days go by, and she's making a couple comments to me, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, these were the days when we had landlines. So we didn't have cell phones. We quite frankly didn't have parents home. So in the 80s, and the kids that were by the time teenagers in the 80s were latchkey kids, a lot of us. Latchkey, for those of you who don't know, is we were the kids that our parents couldn't afford daycare, had to work maybe more than one job, and then also wanted to have their own social life. And so by the time we were able to operate the front door where they could hide a key somewhere for us, we walked ourselves home from school. We grew up that way through elementary school. So by the time we're in middle school, going to high school, there was no parent around. There was no parent to ask anything about or tell them what was going on or anything, okay? And so I said to her one day, here's my phone number. And again, not a cell phone, so it just mattered, were you home and could they reach you, right? But I, on a piece of paper in my notebook, wrote my home phone number down and gave it to her. And just said, if you ever want to talk sometime, I'm here to listen. The one great thing was she and I both had the same middle school counselor, Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett was amazing. He was one of those guys that connected with kids, right? It didn't matter whether you were going to be able to go to college or you couldn't or any of those kind of things. And she and I both knew we had Mr. Bennett because you got assigned by your last name, right? So then I started talking to Mr. Bennett and saying, I'm a little bit worried about her, I don't know what to do. And of course, he's not supposed to tell me anything, right? Confidentiality. And he says, Sherry, you know what? Just be your friend as best you can, right? That's all I said. Well, one Friday night, when we were 14 years old, I got a call from her. And all she said to me was, I'm going to do it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what are you talking about? And she said, I've already taken a bunch of pills and I've drank some alcohol. I'm going to go into the woods outside our middle school and I'm going to use a razor blade. And she hung up the phone. My mom wasn't anywhere around because it was Friday night. And I didn't have anybody I could call. And I just knew, oh my gosh, I got to get into the woods and like, I don't know how to handle this, but like, I can't know that she said that to me and not show up, you know? So I go tearing across my area because I'm only a couple blocks from the school and I am running through the woods yelling her name. And it was freezing, so it was winter in Wisconsin. All of a sudden I hear this really faint, I'm over here. And again, I am unprepared for this. I come walking towards her a bit. We're both in winter coats. You can see our breath. And I can see she's already made one cut and there's blood coming down her neck. And she's shaking. And I'm saying, please don't do that. Please don't do that. I just need you to listen to me. We can go back to my place. I'm pleading with her because I don't know what to do. Partly, again, I don't know her well enough, and this is not a funny situation, but people punk people also. Like, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like, is she doing this just to scare the crap out of me? Like, I don't know, because I was not into the punk, and I was not into the goth, and I was not into those things, right? Every time I take a step towards her, she'd take a cut. And I'm thinking, as I'm watching her look more pale to me, what am I going to do here? Like, I got to do something. And so I knew I had two strategies. It's all I could think of at 14. Like, I was so far away from her, I would have had to take a run at her. But my boyfriend at the time was the captain of the football team. And I thought, I either have to go running full guns at her with my arms out like that and tackle her to the ground to try to get that out of her hand, or I have to find a way to connect with her as a human being in the crisis she's in right now, and find something I can say so she can listen to me, that just connects and pulls her back out. I decided not to run at her because I didn't know, could she make one bad attempt that would go badly, right? And I just started talking to her and started telling her, I see you, and I know who you are. I know you're intelligent, and I know you care about things. I know right now the situation with your mom and at home feels incredibly difficult, but it's not always going to be that way. And all I kept saying was anything I could think of to help her along that path. I finally got her within a few minutes to drop it out of her hand. And I said, can I come to you, right? She said, yeah. And I went right up to her, grabbed a hold of her. We both have blood running down ourselves. She's starting to faint. We're both the same size. And I'm starting to walk her out of the woods towards my house. Luckily, I'm a couple blocks away and I get her into my house and I get her onto my couch. And by that time, luckily, my mom was home. So for 2 seconds, I tell my mom, oh my gosh, this happened. Here's why I couldn't call 911 right away. And some people don't understand this. And again, I am giving you no advice, and I'm not a licensed therapist, and I'm not a lawyer. I was a 14-year-old kid at the time trying to help somebody, right? She told me out in the woods, do not, no matter what you do, call for help because we can't afford it. I can't afford an ambulance to come. I can't afford stitches. I can't afford, okay? If you don't come from money, you understand that. You understand that I believed she would survive because I had to make sure she survived, right? That her mother would be furious if she came out the other side and here was the bill, right? So I quickly say to my mom, this is what's happening. Like, she's scared. She won't let me call anybody. My mom went back upstairs and I got the phone book out. We had a printed old school phone book. And luckily, Mr. Bennett's phone number was in the phone book. And I called Mr. Bennett and I said, this is Sherry and I'm with and she has done this, and she is at my house, and this is my address, and I don't know what to do, and I don't know how far away you are from me, but I didn't know what to do. She told me not to call medical, right? Luckily, he was there within 10 minutes. He picked her up. He carried her out. And then I didn't know what happened. So I'm going back to school on Monday, and I'm thinking, I don't know if she's going to be in the seat next to me, right? And she wasn't in the seat next to me. And in those days, right, you don't have all these communication skills. We didn't have social media. Everybody's not talking about what happened. So for about 2 weeks, she wasn't in her seat, and he couldn't tell me anything. And then one day, she walked into class, and I thought, oh my gosh, she's okay. She's okay. And she was wearing a turtleneck so that it covered her neck. And if she'd moved just a little bit, I could see the scar and the stitches on her neck. And she wouldn't look at me. And at first I felt bad, and then I understood. She's got to turn her back on me because everybody in the school right now is talking about, is she crazy? And what did she do? And that I was there, and was I drinking with her? I was an athlete at the time. Was I drinking with her and all that kind of stuff? I felt sad and I felt bad, and I thought she's mad at me because I went to Mr. Bennett. But I had to do the right thing. I had to do the best right thing I could do at that time. Why am I sharing this with you? Not necessarily on this, how do we help and save people, but I will tell you a little bit more about what happened about different people after that. It was in that moment I learned how to try to communicate with somebody that I couldn't in that moment, in their chaotic crisis, reach them as a human. And I thought about at the time, why did she tell me? Why did she tell me? She told me because she wanted help. She told me because she knew I would come try to save her. She told me because she knew I wasn't somebody who was so running with the crowd that I wouldn't just veer and do what I needed to do, right? To try to make it better. She never talked to me again. And that's okay. I understand. During high school, I heard little bits and pieces, and I don't know for sure did she graduate or not, but it's okay. What that taught me was to be not afraid to step in when a human being is having a crisis. So I became a high school teacher. My students knew that when you are a high school teacher, you're a mandatory report, right? My students know if they come into Miss Martell's office or they come into Mrs. Furmanick's office at that time, that they could talk to me, that I would shut the door, that I would listen as long as it takes. But they also knew, because I told them at the beginning of every semester, I am a mandatory report. I have to call the counselor. They will call your parents, but I will be here to listen. And I know this isn't the easiest time in your life. I won't say how many students that was over the 14 years I taught. And they were all okay, thank goodness. And I will tell you that adults get into that crisis place too sometimes. So in June of 2020, and we know what 2020 felt like, one of my first trips down to Florida, staying on the ocean, deciding did I want to live here. I'm standing on the ocean watching the sunset with some of my friends, and all of a sudden we could see this woman who kept going up and down in the ocean, but really in an awkward fashion. Like she wasn't okay. I could tell she wasn't riding the wave. She wasn't enjoying herself. It was super awkward, and I could tell she wasn't coordinated. Not that it was coordinated, right? But I could tell something was wrong. She at one point started coming out of the ocean, and she could hardly stand up and walk. I turned around and saw her shoes behind me and her keys. But she wasn't coming at us. She was stumbling off. And I looked at my friends, and one of them has known me since high school. And again, I was, 50-something at the time. And I just looked at her, and she goes, "You're going to go, aren't you? You're going to go." And I said, I have to go. So I went up to her and just looked her straight in the face. And here's the question. I looked her right in the eyes, and I gently, and that's key, gently said, "Are you trying to kill yourself?" And her head popped up and she looked at me and she said, well, how'd you know? I said, because I was watching you. Because I was watching you. That means I saw you, right? Well, that woman I ended up helping off the beach, sitting with for the evening, listening to her story, listening to why she felt she couldn't go on and what had happened, right? She had rented that space to just come here and do that. She was here on a short-term rental. So first of all, can you imagine for her life? Second of all, can you imagine for that association if that would have happened and that becomes statistics here in our area where you live and love and whatever else, because you don't want that to happen for anybody. So it took a couple hours, but I said, let me just see if we can, get you into your place, get you, settled in for the night and whatever, and you just need to sleep. And I'm happy to stay here with you or whatever we need to do, right? She explained to me she had, some issues with drinking addiction and whatever, and did she have some help? But I was luckily having a friend here that I knew I could call to say, can you connect with her? Because it was past my abilities, right? And then I went back to my friends. And then what you have to do to learn how to detach is that I just hope she's okay. And I know I have to live with the consequences that I went and did whatever in case I get liability over it. I have to learn how to, whatever her ultimate results are, I can't stay on watch 24/7, nor can somebody else, because we can't save everybody in every minute, right? It's just not physically possible. It's not emotionally possible. Again, the reason I'm sharing these things are all of the communication skills about this stuff. And that is this. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. These are actually good outcomes. Every single person, to my knowledge, to this date, is still alive. They were in a moment where they felt like they didn't have any other option. They had other humans turning their head and not willing to walk into the messy to go, I see you and I want to hear you. And let's figure something out, right? I could only do part of the journey in the crisis, and then I need you and a lot of times other professional people. But it made me start to think about that is so much of our life skills of it's easy to learn to communicate with a script we learn, right? It's easy in business to go, I know how to do this stuff that is not hostage negotiations. And granted, in this situation, they're holding themselves hostage because they are traumatized at the time. None of the people that I have encountered of the 8 have been in a psychosis place, and I'm not skilled to know how to tell you what to do there. These were humans that were just at a crisis place. When we act like we're so surprised, like, oh my gosh, somebody must be severely mentally ill. No, they're not. People have been jumping off buildings since 1929 when the stock market crashes. They weren't all mentally not able and not stable. And so these are the things that I think are also transferable skills to life in learning how to really communicate and communicate in a crisis situation where what you're doing, instead of yelling at the person and telling them what's going to happen and here's what we're going to do, and maybe there's a place and time for that, you are really using your soul and using your humanness and using any ability you have to connect with them in that minute to just help them get through the night. Because tomorrow will hopefully be different and a new beginning and another choice and a different way you can see something. The woman on the ocean in 2020, she got to my friend who was very skilled at sobriety, and he helped her that night. He helped her call her sister, who flew in to come get her, and she went back to the state that she was from. All those things sometimes can circumvent a really difficult situation. But a lot of people, whether it's a car crash, whether it's I don't know what, they don't want to get involved. And I just feel like I don't want to have crisis every day, right? I don't want to be a person saving people all the time. But I am somebody who has done this multiple times, not by choice, but by circumstance and in the right place at the right time, right? Usually I don't talk about it, but I do want to say at this time when our world is feeling a little bigger and heavier, and I know people who are worried about their children I know adults that I actually am having encounters in business with who have had these feelings at times. We need to get to a place where more of us are able to just reach out or have the conversation or listen and not judge. And a lot of it, when I look back now at that 14-year-old who had no clue about how do I have to talk her into listening to me. Over time, I've learned some pretty amazing skills on communication, on being attached and unattached. What is my responsibility? What can I do? Not agonizing and feeling like, for several different people in different situations where they're having some crisis, I can't be responsible for them and I can't watch them 24/7, nor can you. Learning those pieces and learning to say, I'm going to help you in crisis, and then you have to do this heavy work. And I'm here on the side, but you can't grow if I take that away from you, are some pretty great skills to have. And I think that it's something that the more we get comfortable with it, that it can just be a simple conversation sometimes, a simple beginning. And the majority of it happens by looking somebody in the eye rather than diverting like we often do. So I just thought those are some pretty great lessons I learned at 14 that have helped me through my life and helped other certain people that I happen to encounter. We, of course, wish everybody well, and the majority of us can't understand what somebody is going through, no matter what they happen to be looking like right in front of us. And my big message is, don't be afraid of the messy. Don't be afraid to step in. Don't be afraid of humanity, because humanity is also pretty amazing when you see those people turn around, get back to thriving, and they're just thankful that you were there and that you were willing to step in the messy. Have a good night.